So today we're going to make spaghetti and meatballs, and I'm going to make the sauce first and then I'll clean up from that, and then we're going to do the meatballs. And this is really easy. I'm making a real big batch, so I'm using 2 big cans of tomatoes, but of course you adapt this for what you're doing and make a smaller batch. So all we have to do is put a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of a pan, of a pot. Cover the bottom pretty good. I'm doing 2 big cans, so I used a pretty good amount of olive oil. Just cover the bottom of the pan so that the whole pan is covered with olive oil. And then it doesn't have to be deep or anything. Just make sure the whole pan, the bottom of the pan is lightly covered with olive oil. Then you're going to put in a chopped red onion. You don't have to do this. You can make tomato sauce without onion in it at all if you don't like it. Or I have here 4 cloves of garlic, which is 2 cloves per can. You can also omit the garlic and just do the onion. I mean, you do you. That's what it's all about here. So we're going to stir these around and get them a little fragrant. Already fragrant. To my onions, I am going to add a little bit of pepper. You can add a little salt, but I'm not going to because I usually use salt-free tomato paste products, and these are not. These have salt in them, so I'm not going to add any salt. Just a little pepper. Move them around. Get them nice and fragrant. When you start to smell them and they smell really, really good and they've become just a little bit translucent. Then you're going to add your tomatoes. So I'm going to give them a minute, but while we're doing that, I'll talk about the other things that I put in my sauce. I'm going to cook meatballs in this sauce later, but you could just make this sauce and that would be great over pasta. I always put a little bit of hot pepper flakes, totally optional. I always use a little dry oregano, pretty good. I use both dry and fresh basil, but absolutely not necessary. If you don't have fresh basil, you don't have to worry about it. I also, if I was just making this only to eat on pasta, I would put a little bit of Parmesan cheese in it too. It just kind of gives it a little kick, but we'll talk about that later in the process. My onions are starting to look nice and translucent. My garlic smells delicious. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dump crushed tomatoes. You could use whole tomatoes and just crush them with your hands. If that's all you had, but this is just the easy way. I put a little bit of water in that can to get all the tomato out because there's no need to waste that, and also it thins out the crushed tomatoes just a little bit. So I put my tomatoes, my little bit of water. I'm mixing everything in with all that yummy onions and garlic. And now I'm going to just put maybe, I have 2 cans of tomatoes, so I'm going to maybe put a tablespoon of oregano. If I only was using 1, maybe I'd use half that amount. And as far as the hot pepper flakes, just sprinkle as much as you think you want. That's not even a half a teaspoon. I'm going to put a shot of a little bit of dry basil because I do have fresh basil. That was maybe a teaspoon for 2 cans. But you know, that's very individual. Whatever you like. You like more oregano? Use more oregano. You don't like oregano at all? Don't use it. So we're going to just put this, as soon as I see it start to bubble up a little bit, I'm going to lower it down, turn it down to a low flame and put a lid on it. And then I'm going to start to assemble my meatballs, and we'll get back here and I'll show you that. So here I have all the ingredients for meatballs. I like to use meatball mix. kind of. I don't like to get the one that's already pre-mixed. I like to have ground beef and ground veal, ideally, or ground beef and ground pork, or ground beef, ground pork, and ground veal, which is what I have here. Now I'm making a big giant batch of meatballs, but I'll talk you through if you're going to make a smaller batch. This is actually 4 pounds of meat, which is not necessary. I also like to use white bread, cubed up and soaked with milk. You can use plain old breadcrumbs. I do soak even my breadcrumbs though in milk, or wine or water, whatever you have, just to get them moist so that the bread is not sucking out the moisture from the meat. It's my theory. I'm gonna stick with it. We have garlic, we have parsley, eggs, and Parmesan cheese, salt, pepper, and oregano. So this is how it's going to work. If you are only making 1 pound of meat, it's usually 1 pound of meat, 1 egg, a 1/4 cup of breadcrumb, a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, and then garlic and parsley to suit your taste. Usually a clove or 2 of garlic and a little bit of parsley. Maybe you don't like fresh parsley. Don't use it. Maybe you don't like dry oregano. Don't use it. You can make this to be your own. But what you do is you put, I've had these soaking, these crumbs, bread cubes, in, I like to use 2 pieces of white bread per pound. So there were 8 pieces of white bread. I cut the crusts off, I cubed them, and I let them soak in milk. It could be white wine or water. For 8 pieces of bread, I used a 1/2 cup of liquid. So can kind of, but it doesn't, it's not a science, you know, you just do you. You just kind of get everything in there, and your parsley and your stuff. I like to put a little black pepper as well. You know, you can use freshly ground or you can grind up your own. Oregano, I just like a sprinkle over the top just to let us know. I don't know, I think oregano gives it a nice Italian flavor. They say about a teaspoon of salt per pound of meat. You know, I'm trying not to kill the dad, so I'm going to cut that back a little bit. And lightly beat your eggs before you put them in. I'm going to mix them up a little bit before I add my cheese because I like to get it incorporated. This is where your hands get dirty, everybody. You don't want to squish the meat like you're mean and angry at it. You just want to kind of get your fingers in there and get it all kind of mixed in very nicely, like you're massaging it, not squeezing it, just massaging it, because if you squeeze it, they might be a little tough, your meatballs, so you don't want to do that. So we're going to mix this all in real nice, get it all going. I'm going to plop my cheese in now. That was about a cup of cheese. Here's our nice mixed up meatball mix. And now I'm going to make these into balls. You can make whatever size you want. I tend to make mine around this size. Okay, so these meatballs were just a tiny bit bigger than I normally make, so they did take an extra few minutes. And you'll see they're not done by any means, but they have a little bit of brownness to them. And now we're going to take them out of the oven and put them right in the sauce. Just very gently place them in the sauce. Browning them in the oven or in a pan does kind of take away a little bit of the extra fat from the sauce, but you still get all the nice good flavor. So we're going to put these back in this pot. And we're going to cook them for another, these are kind of big. I don't usually make my meatballs quite this big, but I'm going to cook them for another about half an hour, 40 minutes. And then I can just turn them off and let them kind of sit there until we're ready to make our pasta and eat our dinner. We'll definitely show you a picture of the final product. But this is what you do. So just know that this is all, you know, you adapt these things for what you like and how you can do it. I guess the basics of a meatball are some breadcrumbs and an egg and you know, any seasonings and herbs that you might like. And you know, you can brown them if you want. You don't have to brown them if you don't want to. I'm also going to brown up a little bit of hot sausage and just serve that on the side. I don't want that hot sausage flavor in my sauce. Meatballs freeze great, and they make for good, you know, you can freeze them in the sauce and then have another meal, or you could just freeze meatballs alone and have a nice meatball sandwich. Now that I've put all of this meat in this pot, I am going to bump up the heat to about a medium low. You still want them to kind of simmer. You don't want them to heavily boil because you don't want to burn the sauce. But you're going to need to increase it just a little bit because there's a lot of meat in there. But we'll show you a picture of everything when it's all done. And that's meatballs and sauce, everybody. Sauce from Billy.